Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the first AMA session. AMA stands for Ask Me Anything, in case you don't know. I'm your host, Adam Klein, and I'm very excited. I'm excited because this is the first AMA session we're doing live. I see already people started joining the live session. And I'm also excited because we are having the first panelist in AMA was one of my favorite developers in the entire planet. He's a very nice guy. He created some cool open source projects like mobx and Immer. You probably know them. And let's have him join. Michel?
Good evening.
Good evening. מה שלומך?
טוב, תודה.
הכל סבבה?
הכל סבבה.
אני סבבה. אתה רוצה לדבר בעברית?
לא, עברית זה קשה.
עברית זה קשה. In case you don't know, Michel is learning Hebrew, so I tried to challenge him. So thank you for joining. So I'll just give a quick intro about what we're doing here. Basically, you guys and girls and folks can ask questions in slido.com. As you can see on the screen, just join slido.com, hashtag, and the session ID is AMA500. You can ask questions, upvote questions, and we also have polls. I don't know if we'll do this in this session, but generally we have polls. And we have a delay of like 20 seconds to the Facebook Live. So if you're watching from Facebook Live, Slido will update like 20 seconds before, so don't be alarmed. And yeah, Michel is coming to Israel in the end of the month, end of March, to do a panel, right? Which is free of charge. It's a meetup and 2 workshops, which you can ask your boss to cover the cost for you, mobx and TypeScript. And also is coming to YGLF.
Correct, and there will be a short workshop as well.
Right. How many times have you been to Israel already?
I think this will be the 5th time.
Only the 5th? I thought it's like the 10th. You shouldn't buy a house in Tel Aviv. It's too expensive.
No, I looked at it just for fun, but the fun ends very quickly.
Right. So just so you know, because we're live, you can't curse like you usually do. I know you really like to, but in case you really want, I prepared some sound effects like this one. So you can say, what the? Exactly. Say something funny.
Yalla, yalla.
Okay, so we have everything set up. We have our sound effects. We have our Michel, and we have me. And let's start with the questions, I guess. Do you want to... we can do it from my screen or your screen.
I can share my screen, I guess.
Yeah, share your screen, and if you have something to show, like, and I will make you the host. Participants.
Ooh.
Yeah, because I think it's better if they see you most of the time and not me, because you're more beautiful.
יופי מאוד.
יפה מאוד. So now mobx Michel is... Did you know that mobx used to be called mobservable, which is short for Michel Observable?
No, it isn't. It's it comes from mob. Like there's a mob of observables, like a lot of them.
Oh, okay, I see. Of course.
I would never do such a thing.
No, of course not. You're the nicest guy on the planet. Did I say that already?
Exactly. I have to keep pretending that.
So I see your video stuck. I don't know if everybody else sees it stuck. And your screen share is also stuck.
Oh, nice. Is it?
But I can hear you. Yeah, so maybe I will share my screen and I will ask you questions.
Okay.
And we will just hear your gentle voice until we fix this problem. Or, wait a second. You know what? Try to share again. Maybe it will work. Oh, okay. I think it's working.
It does?
Yeah. Cool.
Amazing. Okay, cool. So let me know, dear host, which one do you want to start on?
It looks like now I lost my screen. Just a second. I think you can start from the first one. It looks interesting. Common anti-patterns to watch out from. I assume they mean mobx.
Yeah. Let's assume it's mobx specific. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And maybe also with a surprising answer. So I think that the most dangerous anti-pattern I see when using mobx is having too many reactions for two reasons. So that's using reactions and auto-run too much. One is that auto-runs or reactions can very often be replaced by something like computed, which makes the code much clearer. And that's especially the case when you have an auto-run which is updating some other piece of state in your application. That's usually an anti-pattern. There are some good cases, but it is usually an anti-pattern. And the second thing is there can be something like too much reactivity. So what reactivity is really good at is separating where a change happens from the place where a change is relevant. But sometimes, and I can give two examples, that separation doesn't really add anything. In which case, it can be just as easy to write some imperative code instead of setting up a reaction. So let me give two examples to clarify that. So the first one is like, suppose you have an object, some model, and you want to save it to the server, to send it to the server if it changed, for example. So quite a common practice is to have some serialization function and put it in a auto run or inside a reaction, and then if it changes, then send it to the server. And that's in principle a fine approach, but sometimes it's not that important because sometimes you have an application where like the save points are very explicit. For example, because there's a very explicit save button in the UI or something. And it's not that interesting to send changes too often. And then it might sometimes be just as easy to just very explicitly call your save logic instead of doing it reactive. But that usually keeps the flow a little bit simpler as long as you don't have to do that in a lot of places.
So if I can summarize what I understand from what you're saying, is that auto-run and reaction are really cool because I can say, oh, I can automatically react to things. But then you're saying I'm not considering the fact that there's more like magic in side effects because another developer doesn't explicitly say that, oh, I'm sending something to the server right now. It happens in some side effect.
Exactly. So that pattern isn't. It's very nice in some applications, and in some it isn't. So the downside is that there's more indirection, and the upside is it's done automatically, which, depending on your architecture, can be a good thing or a bad thing. So if you notice that you're like starting to introduce flags to avoid the side effect from happening, then probably it's better to do it reactive at all.
Right. Michel, can you try to start your video again? Let's see if it works. And if it works, then it's good because then people can see you.
Ah, sure. Hello.
Cool. Now they know I don't have a voice double for Michel. So Alex, I hope we answered your question. Let's move on to the next question, which is, this is a good one. How do you recommend organizing mobx stores? Any tips? I actually heard this question so many times from people using mobx or want to use mobx.
Yes. This is always a hard question to answer, because like for any answer you give, there's somebody else who does it differently, which also works very well. Basically, because mobx doesn't have a really strong opinion about it. That being said, what I like the most, what I usually do myself, and which I also see a lot of teams applying successfully, is to take the class-oriented approach. So the idea that you will have all your state captured in classes, both for the stores and the models. And secondly, that you also make sure that the whole thing is still organized as a tree. And it means that stores have a hierarchical relationship, so they know maybe about their parents, and through their parents they can get access to their to other stores if they need to. But they always are contained at a very specific place, and same for the models. And that's in the cases
so when you
where
say, sorry to interrupt, but when you say models, you mean like a single item inside the store, inside the collection?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, in mobx, the distinction between the two isn't super explicit. But I noticed it's how people tend to talk about it, about stores.
Yeah, you don't even have a concept of a store. Observable is in the like the attribute level.
Exactly, it's more a conventional thing than a really tangible thing.
So I know that like the follow-up question, I already saw it somewhere in the slide or so. The follow-up question is, what if you have cross dependencies between stores, circles and stuff?
Yes. So the important thing is that's where the parental relationship becomes really useful. And so the best way to work with cross-references is to never really store your cross-references, but rather always look them up by using getter properties or computed properties.
Do you have some code to show that?
Yes, I should elaborate a bit.
Of course. People want to see code, Michel. They don't want to see or hear
Sorry.
you.
So let's say that we have a, let's see if I can get highlighting.
Michel is using Visual Studio Code with a light theme.
It gives good contrast. But usually in the night, I switch to dark mode.
In the night, you switch to dark mode?
Yeah.
No, because it helps you fall asleep?
No, because then there's less light in the environment. Anyway, you're distracting me, Adam.
I'm trying to.
So suppose that you, I don't know.
Oh, can you increase the font size, like zoom in?
Sure. Just the code can do all that. It's awesome.
Yeah, Visual Code is amazing. And no one is paying us to say that. Oh, you switched to dark mode for us. Thank you.
Well, no, not intentionally. I just did it. I guess I pressed a weird key. So I say I have an notification store and a to-do store. So usually I try to create a hierarchy where, like this root app store, which gathers all the state of the application, which combines them all. So in my have this to-dos is new to-dos, this. And so if you build a tree like this, and then, for example, this gets the app passed in, and at some point I don't know, you need to load data. What you can then do is just go back to the app, and then go to its auth store, and then to check the notification over there. And so it means that you always walk up and down in the tree you're creating, and everything really lives at one place.
Right. And if you need to access, let's say, the auth store from the to-do store?
Yes. So then you go back to the app, and that has the basically the fixed reference to the auth store. And say if you have like a to-do which is associated with a user, then typically what you want to store is just the user ID.
Right.
And then introduce a getter that goes to, let's say that this also has a reference to its to-do store that owns it. And then through its app store, and then through the application store. And then get user, distant user ID. And so that means that because this is lazily evaluated always, that there's only one source of truth for what the user with that ID represents.
So the get user is computed, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So now you can also reload the to-dos from the server just with the to-do ID. Reload the to-dos, and the reference to the user will be automatically updated.
Exactly. So it's automatically restored, and same the other way around. If like the user in the notification store changes, then it's automatically reflected in by this computer property, because it's because we're only looking to reference that don't change, like the relationship between the stores, and the rest is all dynamic lookups. So we don't hold a real reference to the user anywhere.
Right.
So that means we never accidentally referring stale data.
Can you save all the code that you're going to write, and we'll post it later, like a link or something?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Cool. Let's move to the next question. Thank you, 123. And that was a good question because I wrote it. Another questions from Alex. Let's give someone else a chance because Alex has a lot of questions. Alex, don't worry, we'll get to your questions. Oh, this is a good one. I like it. Why mobx hasn't gained as much traction as e.g. Redux, for example, despite having awesome performance and good dev experience, less boilerplate compared to e.g. Redux? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, good question.
Wait, they said the R word, so I have to do this.
Shame.
But that's a good question.
Yeah, it's definitely a good question. I'm not even sure whether I'm the best person to answer. I think you can throw your own opinion into that as well, Adam. But I tend to say because mobx is pretty boring in a certain way. Like mobx isn't really revolutionary. It's like doing reactivity, which has done in the past, I think slightly better, but it's not a super different model from what Knockout or Angular or Vue are doing. So in that sense, it's less exciting. And also, all the core concepts are pretty small and straightforward. So the funny thing is that blogs about blog posts about mobx tend to be a little bit boring and a little bit the same, because they usually all go through like, oh, you have actions and computed and state and reactions, and that's the mental model. And once you're beyond that, then basically the rest follows from that. So the interesting thing is, I think it's like super successful. It's like you said, companies like Microsoft and DICE and Netflix and Amazon and probably in a lot of other places. But there's it's less interesting to share a lot about from thought leader perspective, because it's in a certain way a pretty old paradigm, the observable paradigm. So I think that's one of the reasons.
I think you were correct in saying that I will answer this question better because you're very modest. So first of all, Redux didn't invent that. It's event patterns, CQRS. It's just everybody's taking concepts and reapplying them. I was very excited when I saw mobx for the first time. I think it's like the simplicity is genius, and I think it's the only state management solution that actually knows your system better than you do. Like it knows what depends on what. Like I think Redux had the first player advantage, first of all, and second, because I speak with a lot of companies, especially in Israel, sometimes in New York, and when I show them just how they don't know Redux and mobx, and I show them this is getting started with mobx, this is getting started with Redux, most of them are like, of course we'll choose mobx. It's just, it looks like what we're used to doing, especially if they don't know immutable data. But then they have questions like these, like how do I organize the stores? What if I have cross dependencies? How do I do time traveling? Blah blah blah. I think these are the main questions that I encounter, and I feel like there should be like maybe like more of an architecture guide to how to build apps with mobx.
Yeah, that's correct.
Something like that.
Yeah, I did discuss it in my workshops, but I never took the time or find the effort, or how do you call it, to really put it on paper. And originally I didn't do that because I just wanted to see like what the community come up with, and I think there are now quite standardized patterns like the ones we just discussed. But yeah, as I said, I never really took the time to put that on paper very clearly, nor did anybody else, except for the. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, I'm kidding. But now you have time because you quit your job.
True, but now I'm preparing workshops and such. But the mobx book does discuss this these things also. The quick guide to mobx.
Okay, so people get the mobx book and sign up to Michel's workshops. That's the conclusion I get from this.
That's for now the best way to figure it out. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next question. Let's choose someone who we still didn't answer. Let's see. Or you can choose one that you want to that you want to answer?
Actually, the top one is a pretty funny question.
How do you reconcile your dislike?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's choose this one. How do you reconcile your dislike for magic with your love for React hooks? They seem to me like a mix-up of concepts modeled in your view, relying on globals. Good question.
Yeah, probably not easy one to get a really clear answer, to give a really clear answer on. But in principle, I don't dislike magic. And that's because I think magic is a word which is misused in our branch. Because like in programming, there is no magic. There's always logical explanation for everything because computers tend to be quite deterministic in general. I mean, there's not like, for everything that happens, there is an explanation. Just the question is how hard it is to find it. So that being said, like whether something occurs to be magic is, I think, maybe for 70% on the side of the person who perceives it as magic. So if something is magic, that just means that the abstraction isn't understood. Like you can compare, for example, a Postgres database with a CSV file, and then you might say like, a Postgres database is absolutely a magical thing, where CSV files are really straightforward and I can reason about them very clearly. Nonetheless, we do prefer to store our data in a database like Postgres because it gives us much better capabilities, much better productivity, and because we were learned to understand the abstractions it has. And so I think the same applies both to mobx and React hooks. People can call both magic if it's like unclear to them why it works the way it works. But as soon as you do a little bit of study in either of them, the magic should disappear, I think. So in that sense, I don't dislike magic. I also don't think that React hooks are magic. Actually, there's an interesting lot of similarity between React hooks and mobx, actually. So what is very similar is that they both basically do a kind of runtime tracking of state, where they store the state in the background for you, and register reads and writes. And so with mobx, that's a little bit more sophisticated because with hooks, it's just the linear path in the code from top to bottom, and you cannot do branching and stuff. But basically, it's both using side effectful reads to do things automatically for you.
So if I can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I kind of agree a little bit with the second part of the question, that they tend to put the model in your view. But maybe that's because you just get used to it. And so if we now have a function component, we tend to consider that entire function component as a view. And probably we will be talking about that in the future in different terms, where just the thing behind the return statement is what we call the view, and the function itself, we more look like that as a class, as a component in its entirety.
Right. So the takeaways from your answer for me are that Redux is like a CSV file and mobx is like Postgres.
Yes, in certain ways, I think you can make a comparison. Like people tend to say, it's so easy to reason about, but that usually just means that you have to do more yourself, which as a result, there's less to reason about.
Right. But seriously, I think magic, when people say magic, is what they don't see, right? And it happens and they don't know how it happened. That's a magic trick.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess with React hooks, the magic is the context of execution. You don't do this dot equals. React does it for you, and that's magic.
Yes.
But with mobx,
Yes.
the magic is completely different. It's the dependencies of execution or reactions.
Yes.
So that's like the more the framework or library does for you, the more there's magic, because it's not in your application, it's inside the library.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next question. I think Alex deserves another one, right? He asked so many questions.
He does.
So should I export a store singleton or the store class? I think you already showed, right, that you do new.
I think the question is, in both cases you do new. But the question is the place where you do it. Like, if you go back to the editor. So the question is, if this is the file where app is defined, do you then export class app, or do you create a singleton once and just export app is a new app? So that there's only one app really available in the entire application, and you don't have to new it, for example, when you create the render tree. This is a little bit depth versus spaces discussion in a certain way. But I tend to say for any serious bigger project, I would go for the export class version. And the basic reason for that is that if you run a test, app, and then you are either doing import app from app, and then you can do like an app load to dos, and then later on you have another test also on the app, and it tests something different. And then the trick or the problem which you have if you expose the singleton is that you have to reset the internal state of the app. So like, I don't know, you have to do a .reset and a before each hook or something. And I think that's something one can easily make mistakes with. Whereas when you just expose a class and always create the app locally in the test, then you don't have this problem, because then the app in this test is a completely different app compared to the one in this test. So that's why I tend to say, like, in more serious projects or bigger projects or where multiple people are involved, do the export the class. But I can see why people like to export singletons. And that's because you can basically skip the whole provider or context usage in React, because then you can just also directly import the app in any component file and make sure that that component has access to the app without using things like provider and inject or react.create context.
Cool.
So these are the benefits of either approach.
Okay, let's choose something else. Are there any plans for computed properties that can take parameters from Anonymous? Anonymous, why are you scared to show your name?
The question, the answer to the question is pretty straightforward. The answer is no, there are not really plans for it, except that it's a little bit possible already now by using create transformer, which takes one argument and caches on that. But no, there are not really plans for it because it's a pretty hard problem. Because it would mean that if computed caches its output. So if you have arguments, that would probably mean that you have to guess the output for every different value of argument that comes in. So that means that you get a memorization table on the entire function, and you don't really know when you can remove entries from the caching table. So that means it's very susceptible to creating memory leaks. But that being said, there's no real need to do that or to need that in practice, because if you have like say you want to have a view like I have the app store somewhere. Say get all to-dos by user, and then you pass in some user ID, and then you filter over the to-dos. Blah, blah, blah. And so a confusion that exists is that people think that something needs to be computed before mobx is able to crack it and be able to react to it. And that's not the case. It doesn't matter whether you use computed or not for tracking. In both cases, mobx will properly propagate all the updates. The only thing that computed does is it caches the output. And so, as I said, if there are many different user IDs, then the question is, do you need? Then mobx would need to know that it has to create a cache for all the possible outputs, for all the possible user IDs, and it doesn't know when to remove them. So it's annoying, but you can do that easily yourself. So what you could do is, if you have this function, then you can just return a computed, which you create in line. And if you take this computed, and then you can just make some map yourself. So map string comma. Right.
So it's like a memoirs dictionary of dynamic computed values.
Exactly. Exactly that. So then you can like check if to-dos by user has auto conversion. It's not what it's supposed to do, but that's because I'm writing Java. Then you just return the computed value you have, and otherwise you create a new one and you add it to the cache. And then you have caching for views, and then you also have full control over when derivations are removed from the map. Then you can, for example, say like, if the to-dos disappear or certain users disappear from my user store, I also want to remove them from this memorization table, etc. So then you have control over that, and then you have basically cache views with as many arguments as you like. You just have to build a map for it.
Like we say in Israel, Kal.
Kal.
Cool. So I want to do an experiment. Since this is the first live session that we're having, I will display a poll on your. So if you open Slido, like on your phone or a mobile phone or a different tab, because we have 20 minutes delay from the time I hit display poll. It will take like 20 seconds until you see it on the live Facebook, but you will see it immediately on your Slido. So let's show another question, and then I'll display the poll so we can see how people respond to it in the background. Okay.
Seconds.
I said 20 minutes. I meant 20 seconds, of course. Thank you for correcting me. Is there any question? Oh, here's a good question that 123 asked. What the hell is Remmi?
Something entirely different. As you can see, Remmi, that's the reverse of immer. That's where the name comes from. And what it tries to do conceptually, so let me go to the, there it is. So it's like a project on my own repo. And it's a library which you can create lenses which is not very exciting or new in general. But it has two benefits. One is you can write updates to lenses using immer, and then lenses will internally. Okay, I have to take a step back.
Can you zoom in first to the browser a bit? And I want to remind people that we have a poll. Yeah, I think it's better. Maybe even a bit more.
It's responding really slow. That's funny. It's still so bad. I'm not doing anything.
Because you're using Windows.
I'm using Ubuntu.
That's because you're using Ubuntu.
I just blame Zoom. So the idea is that you can have like an immutable tree, and then you can create lenses for it. It's called cursor here, but it's actually a lens. And then you can emit updates to that with immer update functions. So even though it's an immutable tree, you can write to it with immer. And it has a few interesting benefits. So you can just write an update to a lens on a certain part of the tree, and then it will result in an update of the original tree. So it's basically a write-through mechanism. And it can also enrich the tree. So it means that you can actually define a model for pieces of the tree, a little bit like a mobx.js tree. And it means that you, when you interact with a cursor, it has actually actions and methods. Let's see if there's an example of that. Let's see an example of that quickly. But it means that you can have still class-like interaction with your immutable tree. And so that's quite a fun experiment. But I kind of abandoned it because in the end, I didn't really like it. It was fun for experimenting. But
okay, so if anybody wants to see the experiment, they can search for Remmi.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually, I discussed it in a talk at ReactAMA and Holy.js last year, like the idea behind it. So if you want to understand it a little bit more, you can take a look there. But in the end, I didn't like the developer experience enough to really go through with it.
Okay, so let's move to the next question. Let's try to get, I see there are a lot of questions and they keep coming, so let's try to get a few short ones. So best practices on stores that need data from other stores. Discuss it a bit, so you want to wrap it up maybe?
No, not really. Organize it as a tree and go back through the root of the tree to different places. That's what usually works for me. And that's also the best practice, which is basically encoded in a mobx.js tree, which has kind of all these best practices built into the model. So that if you're like super certain on how to structure mobx stores, then playing with mobx.js tree can help you with that because it's like super organized out of the box.
So you're saying even if you're not using mobx.js tree, you can use it or explore it to get an idea of best practices, how to architecture your stores. Exactly.
That's actually how mobx.js tree started, more as like a reference architecture. Then it's really something to be used. But then people start to using it, making changes to it, and it became actually like quite popular, much more than I had expected. And there are now some really serious companies using it. So yeah, then if you use mobx.js tree, then you basically have an architecture out of the box.
Everything you touch is gold, Michel.
I don't know. Well, that's not true. I think Remmi, I didn't like Remmi.
Okay, so everything that you publish. Cool. So should I export the store singleton or the store class? I think we answered that, right?
Yeah, we had that one.
provider with inject versus import store directly?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is the same as to the singleton question. So I like to use provider inject in more complicated projects because then you have more control over when the instances of a store are created, and then you could just reset them by throwing them away. And with import store, you have global state, so that makes it always a bit hard to reset, especially in tests. But if you don't care that much about it, then import store directly is really straightforward.
Cool. Patterns for fetching initial data from the server.
I think the question to that answer, like to do it on when the store is created or when the component is loaded, depends on whether you need the data in all cases. So there is certain data that you, in principle, need always, like, I don't know, maybe a reference data like the language is available or the profile of the user currently logged in, etc. And then I would load it on store load. And otherwise, if like some data is only relevant for if a certain part of the UI is visible, then I would the component have the component cause it to be loaded. So
by the way, have you tried to think how suspense or React cache will affect mobx? Like if you store the data elsewhere, or is it too immature to even consider how it will go together?
No, I did think about it a little bit. It's hard to say something really decisive about it because there's basically not any documentation or something yet. But for me, the distinction is mostly if it's like domain state, then I would probably still have that loaded and handled by more big stores. Because if you like switching views, etc., then you probably still need the data anyway. But I think it's in the end really depends on the use case. But I think even with suspense, there's definitely still a case for having state at least stored externally, like outside the component tree, for all the state that isn't really specific to the UI.
Right, makes sense. Also, I think it can be just another tool in your toolbox. Like if you just need data for a specific component, not shared anywhere, and you have this mechanism that does it for you with suspense and fallback and everything. You know, that's
exactly.
it's the beauty about mobx also, that you can just incrementally introduce it in different places in your app.
Yeah, exactly. For those interested, I did elaborate a little bit on that in my last blog post, I think from a month ago or something.
Where can we find your blog posts, Michel?
On michel.codes.
Cool. So, self-promotion. This is your time to shine.
Ooh, here. So
according to our poll, you have at least 5 people using mobx and 2 people using Immer.
Cool.
You're excited?
Yes. I have no doubt that's the case. Interesting though, it's if people use it together. I mean, I never really felt the need so far to use them together.
Do you use immutable data sometimes with together with mobx?
Yes, I do, but then usually not with Immer. But yes, I do. Sometimes you just have a record from the server, which you're not really going to manipulate, and then it's just fine to treat it as immutable and just have maybe an observable reference to it. But then beyond that, treat it as immutable. Also, if you have like events in your system, then That's typically a place where I would use immutable data structures to store them, instead of fleshing them all out in models or something.
Okay, so it's not like a bad practice. You just use it when you need it, and it works together well.
Yeah.
Great. So let's try to see other people's questions. Matt Ruby, do you have any thoughts on how finite state machines, X-state, state charts, etc., may fit into the larger mobx ecosystem?
Yes, very good question. And I'm actually playing at the moment with that on a project. So I'm currently doing some consultancy for a company and helping them with precisely this question. And I think it fits quite nicely. And I try to share a bit more that soon on the mobx.js repository. But I think the nice thing about finite state machines is that they can very neatly describe a complex process. So like if you have an imperative process which has to follow certain steps, then it's really nice that you can create a declarative model for that with X-state, for example. And then you can make the distinction like the governance of the process. You put it in X-state, like when you can transition to the next state and what should be the next state and those kind of questions. While the information that you gather during a process, for example, if you have like a shopping cart or something, and the information you gather during that process, you can store that in mobx. And I think that's a way they can work together quite nicely.
It will be nice also if you will have some kind of link that we can share also, so people can look at some code of how they work together.
Yes, there is currently an open issue on mobx.js repository, and there are some solutions mentioned in that issue already. And the current solution I'm working on now is basically based on that.
Oh, cool.
So issue 1149. So yeah, that's the thing that's currently running.
Cool. Choose a question, Michel. Which one do you want to answer the most?
The second question I can answer very quickly. Thoughts on mobx React Lite? No, it's not blinded type. The interesting thing is that actually the mobx bindings were a lot more easy to implement when using hooks than in the old lifecycle model. And so I did that as an experiment, and then Daniel created a package based on that called mobx React Lite, which he basically now maintains that experiment. And the interesting thing is currently I'm working on the version 6 version of the mobx React bindings. And that one has first class support for hooks. And that's basically just exposing mobx React Lite, plus the APIs you're already familiar with, like provider and inject, so that the migration is easy. So the next version of mobx React will actually use mobx React Lite internally to achieve the same thing.
So the short answer to people wondering, like, when can I use mobx with hooks in combination with classes? Like, when do you think it will happen?
Do you mean like in the same code base or have hooks inside a class?
Like you have an application that you're migrating to hooks, so you still have some class components and you have function components with hooks, and you want to use mobx with hooks and also.
Yeah. So currently that's already possible because you can use mobx React Lite plus mobx React and the same code base, and then use the observer from one for function components and the other for classes from mobx React itself. That's of course easily confusing.
But they're using the same context, so they're injecting the same stores or providing the same stores.
mobx React Lite doesn't use provider or inject, but you can combine it with the inject from the classic mobx React. So yeah, you can already use both of them in the same code base. And once mobx React 6 is out, which is I think in that should be in this month still. Then you can use both with just mobx React alone.
Awesome. Let's take this one. I know you answered it 2 times, but is there any overhead for using provider inject over directly importing the store? By Uri.
Technically, yes, of course there is, because it uses the React context mechanism under the hood. But I would be very surprised if you would be able to actually be able to measure that in a real application. And if you're able to measure that, then it's probably because you're like mapping over 1,000 items and you inject on all of them your stores. But then the workaround is also really simple, because they can just do the inject one level higher in the tree. So on the component that does the mapping, and then pass them down using props, if that would really be like a performance bottleneck. But I never seen that actually being a problem.
So it sounds like a premature optimization that
yes,
we should avoid.
Yes.
So I think I'm showing the correct answer. I will hide it, but everybody already saw it. So basically, I'm showing a poll. Just a second. We have some sound, some noises from here, from my assistant. Yeah, so the poll is what was Michel's weirdest job? So far we have one, which is removing stickers from Mac covers. We can keep it open for a few seconds while, first of all, I want to mention that if you want to stay updated with the following AMA sessions that we will do, both for React and Angular, you can like our page, which is a 500 Tech page. That's the page where the video is hosted. Also, I want to remind everybody that Michel is giving workshops in the end of March in Israel, if you're from Israel. You probably have more workshops around the world already planned, no?
Yes, correct. So end of March, I'm in Tel Aviv, indeed, as said. In April, I'm at React Amsterdam and React Finland, both with TypeScript for React devs. I will be at Just Nation, also in Amsterdam, in React Europe.
New York?
Yes, and New York, indeed. How is it called? React Week?
React Week, yeah.
Yeah. And that's it from the top of my head.
So why are you teaching TypeScript, and why do you think it's important for people to take like a whole day workshop of TypeScript?
I think TypeScript is pretty important in large code bases. I've really seen it really improving the maintainability of code bases. But it's quite hard to learn, I think, TypeScript from just documentation you can find, because the language itself is pretty well documented. but not a lot of things around it. Like what are the best practices? What compiler settings should you choose? How should you migrate? How to organize your project? How to deal with things that aren't typed, like external libraries, and like getting that entire picture of TypeScript. That's, I think, pretty hard in the current ecosystem, and I think a workshop really helps there by just running through those things and having a broad overview of all the concepts to grasp when running an actual TypeScript project.
Right. I can say that people just are afraid of TypeScript. Like they say, I want to use TypeScript, and then they get to a situation where they don't know what to do and they struggle with it. And just knowing the basics is not enough. Like you need to feel comfortable with it.
Exactly. It's much more than just the language itself. It's like also knowing how to deal with certain kind of problems. Like I said, like missing typings or weird setup errors. I mean, we started with TypeScript very early, and I'm pretty sure I've wasted weeks in my entire career on figuring out how to set my project properly. Like that's not fixing compiler errors, like because I did typings wrong or something, but just things didn't work together. And I think when joining the workshop, you get a lot of insights in that bigger picture, how to understand how it all hangs together and how things interact with each other beyond
Right.
just the syntax of the language.
Okay, so let's, before we move to the next questions, our poll results are that people think that you had a job removing stickers from Mac covers. Let's expose the correct answer. Oh, you're fixing lawnmower engines.
Yes, yes, that's
you want
correct.
to tell us about it? I will put some sad music.
Yeah. So the long story short is that software engineering is kind of for pussies, because you have like Control-C and version control, and like if you fix physical stuff, then there's no undo management and no version control. Then you just have to not break stuff.
But
Otherwise...
Michel, you cursed and I didn't do the sensor sound. So
oh yes, I was trusting you to do that.
I told you to control yourself. You keep cursing all the time. It's so hard with you.
Ah, sorry. Slicha.
Okay, so let's move to questions because there are still a lot. Is there any performance gain to using proxies in mobx? I know in the last version, right, 6, you're using proxies?
Yes, theoretically, but in practice, no, not really. It's a little bit less memory consumption, but not like really significant. And the bundle is a little bit smaller and such.
So what is the advantage of using proxies?
The big advantage is that it fixes some caveats. Caveats. How do you pronounce it?
Caveats.
That one. Yeah.
You can say it in Dutch.
Valkuilen.
Valkuilen. Yeah.
So it prevents some valkuilen. So there are some things mobx cannot really intercept very nicely without proxies. For example, arrays are not real arrays, and sometimes you will notice that. And mobx before proxies didn't support adding new properties to an object on the fly very well. And with proxies, those edge cases are no longer there. That's the big thing about proxies. And I think that's why you also see the same move in, for example, Vue, which is now also moving to proxies.
Vue is basically copying everything that you did.
Kinda, but not entirely, because like Vue is like inspired a lot by Meteor, and so is mobx.
Yeah, I was kidding, but yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. I never verified, but I think some concepts were taken over quite literally, like the distinction between computed values and effects or watches are they called in Vue.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Let's see if someone asked a question and we didn't answer this specific person. P, there's P here. Michel, please make it explicit and clear that mobx offers great reactivity, but resolving reference to store is a totally separate question. IOC containers for the win. Please, Michel.
Well, it's not really a question, right? It's more of a statement.
It's a demand.
Yes, so that is true. Like when talking about mobx and when answering questions about mobx, it's mostly not about how reactivity works, but like how you organize stuff when using mobx. Which is not really a question that mobx answers. So in that sense, yeah, the statement is entirely correct. So the questions we had before about exposing classes or importing singletons directly, that all relates indeed to this statement. Like mobx doesn't care about it, and so you can use dependency injections or inversion of control, or many different ways to get your store from A to B. And mobx doesn't really care about it, and that's probably also the confusing part for many people.
Right. Would there be a future version of mobx that only works with proxies, dropping support for older browser, smaller library? And I want to add to that question, are there any new features or like what are the plans?
Well, basically, mobx 5 already only supports proxies, which already makes it smaller. And the main reason why the mobx bundle is big is not really the proxy part or the reactivity part. Most of the code is actually in the decorator stuff, and that's because there's 3 different implementations of decorators it has to be compatible with. So most of the load comes from that area.
So if you remove decorators, let's say make a thin mobx without decorators, it will be like a third of the size, or how much?
Yeah, I think a third or half of the size, something in that area. And it's still pretty big because there's like a lot of things shipped out of the box, like different overloads for how you can organize reactions and such.
So is it tree shakeable? Sorry.
Yes, a lot of it is tree shakeable. So I think in practice it's smaller.
So basically, if I don't use decorators, will they be tree shaken?
I think so. It should be, but I never really tried it, I have to admit.
I think when comparing, by the way, the size of the library, not that it matters, but it does matter sometimes for libraries. I think we'll edit this part out of the recorded video, but no, keep it. We're not politically correct.
Yeah.
But seriously, when you're comparing the size of the library, like to Redux, for example, like when you use Redux, you usually use a few other libraries with it, like reselect, sometimes Saga, Thunk, Redux Actions. So you should really compare like the whole ecosystem of what you're using. For example, like reselect gives you selectors, which you get in mobx, like out of the box.
Yeah.
When working with collections of entities, do you recommend wrapping each entity in a class instance or keeping it as a POJO, plain old JavaScript object?
Just to finish up on the previous question, interesting thing is that like the reactivity mechanism is really small. It's only a really small part of mobx. So most of it is, as I said, decorators, and after that, the different kind of collections like arrays and objects. So I wrote a small library called rval, which is just a reactivity mechanism basically, and it's like at least 10 times smaller than mobx or something. So that's quite interesting. So once decorators are standardized, I expect mobx to become a lot smaller.
Oh, that's cool.
And when proxies are available everywhere. Yes, I tend to, as soon as you treat them as mutable, then I would recommend to use classes as well. Just because it's a nice and clear way to organize your code, which is very accessible and readable by others, because like your methods and your concepts are co-located. So I think I would recommend classes. But that's just on what I've seen working well for teams. It's not that there's a technical need to do so.
What if there's like data you get from the server, you never change it in the client, you just refetch it and override whatever in the store? Would you still say wrap it in a class?
No, then I would, like I said before, keep it as an immutable object and store it in an observable collection. But to keep the object itself immutable, and then they stay in its POJOs.
Okay, makes sense. Mobx for locals component state. Will we lose anything when React concurrent mode will be out?
Yes, or probably yes. I think some of the, if you use mobx for local component state, you might not be able to benefit from certain features of concurrent mode. So once that is the case, I would recommend for components where you want to benefit from that, just use state hooks, for example, instead of mobx for local component state.
Okay. Can you elaborate more, like why wouldn't it work with concurrent mode?
Yes, so if you have concurrent mode, then your component can be in 2 different states at the same time, so to speak, because it's like being rendered by 2 different render trees. One is maybe visible, and the other one is waiting for some promise to resolve or something. But that means that they have to be able to fork the local state of the component. And mobx doesn't really have an abstraction for it itself, or as far as I can see now. So I can see that might not work in concurrent mode, where you want the local internal state of component to be in 2 different states at the same time. So that's roughly why.
How about external mobx store with concurrent mode? Will that do any effect, or things that we will need to avoid?
Well, the interesting thing is, if your store is external, then you probably don't want it to be in 2 states at the same time. For example, if you have a shopping cart, I mean, it has 2 items in it, or maybe 3 items in it, because you selected another item you want to add. But it's not that because of you're currently waiting for something to resolve or to be rendered, that your cart is currently in 2 different states at the same time. That would be like super confusing for the user, and you cannot trace anymore about what happens if you submit your current order. Did you then order 2 items or 3 items? So the things that are typically stored externally are about the domain of your application. And the domain of your application, you really want to have in 1 state at any given time. So the multiple states is mostly UI-related states, like to tabs or animations or graphs that are being visualized, which is like not exact, but fast. So I think you can fairly clearly distinguish domain state from UI state. And for domain state, you don't want forks, basically.
Right. I know that mobx React is having like a lot of issues with supporting concurrent mode, and they have all these like zombie child things. Are these also related to mobx React?
I didn't get much reports about that yet. So those issues might appear. It's a good question. But there are certain problems where mobx React doesn't suffer from, which Redux React will suffer from. But I don't have, I don't know from the top of my head which problems those were. But I did see that they were fixing some problems which mobx React wouldn't have.
Okay. How do you stay motivated with all the work on your plate? Anonymous.
Good question. Good question. Sometimes it's hard. So I kind of really enjoy it when I see people using my stuff and then see that it really helps them to be more productive. I think that's the main driver for me. On the other hand, sometimes it is kind of hard because there's this constant inbound of issues and questions, etc. And at the same time, I become, as I said before, an independent consultant. And so it sometimes saddens me. That's like, it's not hard to make a living on top of mobx based on like doing workshops and consultancy and those kind of things. But that basically is means that still nobody is really, or not many are interested in, because there are quite some sponsors. And in sponsoring like the maintenance itself. I mean, people are willing to pay for all services around it, but not for the maintenance itself. So it's like in a country where everybody wants to pay for the car, but nobody wants to pay for the roads, so to speak. So that sometimes makes motivation hard. But I think that's the current state of open source affairs.
Well, I guess you get a lot of motivation from people asking questions and you know, applauding your libraries and how they affect their work. So I assume.
Yes, yes, that definitely. Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
that's really cool to see. It's like things you think about also work for others. That's really great.
Actually, a question out of the top of my head, like how was it introducing when you just built mobx for like yourself and your company? How was it introducing it to other teammates and your boss? Because usually it's like something that you do and people look at you like, why are you reinventing the wheel? Why are you building, you know, the whole infrastructure that we will be stuck with and nobody else will use? Like, how do you deal with that?
I think I was in a lucky position where the team had already quite some confidence on any of the abstractions I came up with in the past. And so what I basically did is make a comparative study between different technologies like React and Angular, and then within React, different ways to manage the state, and pointing out the issues we would have with other solutions like Redux in terms of coupling and in terms of maintainability of the code. And then they were quite convinced, and they were like, let's go ahead and give it a try. And since after that, it really never ever gave any real issues for us. It went on and on.
Did you have to like work in promoting it outside of your company, or was it just happened naturally?
No, outside definitely. I gave quite a few conference talks about it before it really got traction. So it was basically just after the Flux Wars. So people were kind of tired with seeing new state management solutions. So in that sense, the timing wasn't optimal. But at a certain point, there were some people that were trying it, and those were really enthusiastic about it, and that really helped.
Cool. Well, I think you just answered, was mobx created to replace Redux? So unless you have something to add.
No, for us, Redux just didn't cut it. Both in terms of decoupling and maintainability, and in terms of performance. And with maintainability, I mean, we also had third-party companies that needed to write extensions on top of our state. And we really could figure out how to learn them the whole model that's required for that. And also, you cannot get the amount of decoupling you have with mobx when using Redux.
So when you have third-party apps that they are aware that the store is mobx, or they just change properties usually regularly, and your app updates?
Yes, so exactly, that's a nice thing. We give them stores, and they just make changes to them without being aware that there's mobx behind it. And still the UI updates wherever needed. And also the other way around. They build UIs where they just use some stores. And the fact that mobx takes care that their view is updated exactly at the right moment isn't even visible to them. So we have actually users or programmers working in our code base which are not really aware that there's even mobx powering it all behind the scenes. And then it's quite surprising.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's like, if you think about it, it's like the DOM. Like the DOM, people don't think about it. You just set an attribute in the developer tools and everything updates. It's like they're using mobx behind the scenes or something.
Yes, exactly. That's also a super reactive model. I mean, the whole point of it is that not everything updates, but it just the right rectangle repaints.
Right. Exactly, and you don't need to know the implementation detail of how is it accomplished. It's just you set a value, and the browser takes care of the rest. Cool. So, are you working on any new open source projects?
Yes, I am working on Arval, which I mentioned just before. So it's kind of a minimal version of mobx, like very clean and very minimal, and quite a different object model. But lately I didn't have much time for it. But it's kind of cool, and because it's so it doesn't have decorators and collections and all those kind of things. But you have just files and derivations, which are a resemblance of observables and computed. And these are functions that you can read or write to, like a knockout. And then you can use the module pattern to create objects. And so the advantage is that this doesn't have any issues with like this, or doesn't require classes or anything, or decorators, as said. But still, all the binding is correct. And also, it doesn't have the performance overhead of something like mobx.js. So this is an ongoing experiment I'm quite happy about so far. But I do have to invest some more time in it to make it anything serious. But the idea is that because this is keeps everything really small, and also a bit more mutability oriented, it's much more interesting to put it into libraries, for example, that meets state management internally, but which don't want to use mobx currently because mobx is so big and that would blow up your library. But with Arval, you don't have that problem. So that's kind of a work in progress.
Oh, that's a great addition, I think, to like the ecosystem.
Yes.
I used mobx inside my I wrote the Angular 3 components, which made me also write the mobx bindings for Angular. It's not so popular, but still a few hundreds are using it, I guess. But yeah, I think it's great for libraries to be able to use it and not suffer from a larger size. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, currently libraries can use mobx, but then they typically use it as peer dependency, but it usually brings its own problems with it.
Right. Something clicked here. I don't know why. So someone asked, how the hell do you pronounce your last name? Can I try?
Weststrate. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I said it already. No, you say.
Weststrate.
Weststrate. Yeah, it's easy. I don't understand why people are having trouble with it.
Exactly, Adam Klein.
Yeah, Adam Klein is like, Adam Klein. But yeah, you can also call him Michel Weststrate. Right?
Yeah, it literally means West Street.
Oh, it's like your address.
Yes, exactly.
I think you already answered, do you have support for hooks? So we can remove this one. Aldis asked, any regrets about design choices in mobx? If you had the chance to rewrite mobx, would you do anything differently? Should I put sad music?
Yes. So originally, as said, the project started as an internal project, and we were heavily invested in TypeScript. And TypeScript came with decorators, which were super convenient, and they still make it super nice. But then I open sourced it, and it turned out that like the rest of the world was using Babel, and Babel isn't too good with decorators. And maintaining compatibility with like Babel has probably cost more effort in the end than the core algorithm of the whole thing itself. So I don't know if I, in hindsight, would again add decorators, although they make it like super nice. But the fact that they weren't standardized and they still didn't become standardized, which is super surprising, makes me partially regret it. I mean, I don't know how I could get a syntax as nice without decorators, but on the other hand, decorators is a maintenance nightmare or a project nightmare.
So it sounds like you regret not having better decorator support in the language.
Yes, definitely. I was assuming it would be standardized very quickly since Angular is so heavily vested on it, and TypeScript had it figured out very quickly. But yeah.
Well,
sadly,
right. Well, we have limitations of the language, and we just take it to the extreme of how much can we stretch these limitations.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so we're already like an hour and a half in. Yeah, we have just 4 more questions. Are you up for it?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. But you have a sick family, no?
Yes, so they're very quiet and silent, and they don't disturb me because they're all sick.
So I think, okay, so Weber is asking, how do you handle circular store reference? I think you already answered that.
Yeah, I think we answered that already.
Okay, so the live video, by the way, will be both on 500 Tech YouTube channel, I think, if my assistant will do this. and it will stay on the 500 text page, so you can also just see the whole thing. And like we said, we will post links to the code. We answered this one. Do you recommend organizations to use TypeScript? I think pretty much covered it.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, yes.
So I guess it brings us to the final question, which is why the name mobx?
So, as you started with, the initial name of the project was Observable. But that was at a time when there was also an observable proposal in TC39. And that proposal got shut down for very good reasons. I think it was a horrible proposal. But anyway, observable, because the name was so close to it, was associated with it. And so it had kind of a negative association attached to its name. And so that's when I just figured out to cut off the observable part and replace it by X, because anything that ends with X must be super cool and good. So that's how mobx came into being.
So why didn't you change your name to Michex?
I don't know. That's probably for a future library.
Maybe you should.
Maybe I should.
So yeah, so that's the final question. I want to share my screen and thank you and show a few things that we talked about. So you're coming to Israel. You'll be speaking and giving a workshop in You Gotta Love Frontend Code Camp, right?
Correct. Yeah.
You packed your tent?
No, not yet. But like the weather is so nice, I can sleep in the open air, right?
Of course. So
you don't sound convincing, Adam.
You'll just come back red because in the morning the sun will burn your skin.
Oh.
Well, you're not coming to React Next this year, I guess, right?
No, I don't think so.
But it's worth mentioning that we will have it in June. If anybody that's watching wants to submit a talk, we have like 2 days left. And these are the workshops you will have in Israel in the end of March. Mobx panel with Mobx creator. Sorry, that's the free meetup, free of charge, where we'll also have a panel pretty much like this one, just with other people who are actually using Mobx. I mean, you are also actually using Mobx, but people who use Mobx that didn't write Mobx.
Exactly. Which is the best.
Right. And the workshops. If you want to find the link, we'll also post it in our page. And I think that's it. So I'm being told that we have a raffle. Oh, we have a raffle for the TypeScript. We're doing a raffle for the TypeScript workshop. Everything will be on the page. Just go into the page. We'll have all the links there. And I'm super excited, Michel, that you were our first panelist and guest on ReactAMA.
Yes, super. I hope there will be a lot of awesome guests to watch in the future.
Yeah, I think we started from the best one. So, from here it's just downhill.
You're too nice.
That's what my wife tells me.
Send her my regards.
I will. Okay, so toda rabba. Thank you very much. People, by the way, on the live video are giving like really good comments. Thanks, Michel, for making our lives easier. Alex wrote that. Tal Koren also said, thanks for everything, Michel. I don't know what you did with Tal Koren, but he's really thankful. And also, yeah, people are excited, which is nice to see.
Cool. Well, I hope to see them in March.
Cool. So see you around, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and keep in touch.
See ya. Hitrouwt.
Bye bye.